from shows as lovely as the T-Force LCS Rundown. And this week, I am joined by Mr. Kyle Anti-Matsiaselli, also made famous by the T-Force LCS Rundown.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Ciacelli. Look it up in the Twitch link. You'll see my bio. Go follow me.
Also made famous by the T-Force LCS Rundown, we have Mr. Chris Ringler.
Oh, howdy.
And we are just a skinny show, not because there's only just the three of us, but because each of us are under sweltering heat in unreasonable conditions. And that's why, for those of you joining us out on Twitch, there is no lovely video because I'm mostly not wearing clothes. Many clothes I'm not wearing right now.
Well, my air conditioning is working.
Those are the best type of clothes, though.
Those are the best type of clothes.
Clothes that aren't on.
Yeah. It's a hot week. Speaking of hot weeks, we've got a lot to talk about this week. This week is going to be a little bit different than the normal format that you may be used to. Since we're coming upon the very last week of the summer split in the LCS, we're going to be taking a look at those Week 9 matchups. This is going to determine how the finals play out, and really it's much more important than the games this week, because next week is just going to be so goddamn hot like it is here. See, it all comes together. Mitch wouldn't.
It all comes together
over that. But first, a little bit of LCS news. Big for one of the teams vying for good positioning in North America, Adrian stepping down from TIP. He mentioned in what I don't understand why people use this website, twitlonger.com. He basically described how a lot of disappointment is leading to him leave the team, but TIP posted later on that week that he might not be leaving. He's going to be coming back on Wednesday, and they hope he stick around. So
they sure could use him because they have a massive week coming up, as we will get to later in the show.
They got a big week. We also had Kikis's fate decided this week. He's heading down to Gamers 2, which is exciting for him. I was really happy to see that player go to a team. Kikis super exciting. Interesting how it's going to fare for the Unicorns of Love, but hopefully Gamers 2 can make it into the LCS and we get that good Kikis love. Additionally, in the news this week, we have Loco Doco no longer, or at least for a temporary sake, the head coach of TSM. Reginald, there's a whole bunch of TSM drama, as you can imagine, with the Wild Turtle stuff, and now in a recent video that TSM put out, we find out that Loco's also been a problem, and there's been things coming up with him. Reginald has basically come out and said that he's stepping in as coach, and that's just how it's going to go for a little bit. We don't really know exactly how that works internally. I guess he is still around and participating in team sessions. That's Loco Doco. So, for whatever the head coach position means, it is just what it is. So, interesting to see how that plays out for them as they go into finals and hopefully into Worlds.
Yeah.
Indeed. I don't know.
Moving on.
I don't think it's that.
Well,
we'll see if they actually stick with it, because I still think Loco's doing a really good job. They might just be jumping the gun a little early and casting blame.
I think TSM is moving into a new system of management where they kind of put people, under the gun and give them these situations where if they're not performing
do or
up
die
to par,
situations.
yeah, and
I think it's kind of lame.
And we saw that with Dyrus and Wild Turtle. And Dyrus answered the call, I think, because a lot of this came from the top down. So it was Reginald approaching Dyrus and saying, hey, listen, you've been with the team for a while, but, we've got to be Worlds focused here. And that turned around Dyrus. I was wholeheartedly surprised the turnaround that he's taken in this past split, these past couple of games. He's been really good. Wild Turtle did not take as kindly to that. He improved for a little bit when they had Keith come in, but now he's kind of back to his same old, very tilty self, which is not how he normally is. He's usually a pretty average to good player. And I don't think it's working for TSM. I think this almost passive style of, well, we're going to put you, not as the head coach anymore, Loco Doco. Make your decision. Either work through your problems or move on.
This is a problem that TSM's had before. This was, again, very apparent in the whole Chaos Turtle situation back in Season 3. They are very quick to place people under, I don't know, scrutiny, I guess, and put a lot of pressure on them to perform. And I'm not sure that that's a positive thing to be doing to your players, especially looking at the standings. They're 2 games out of first place in the LCS. It's not like they're, bottom 3, bottom 4, something like that. They're still doing very well. They're still TSM, but this is the problem. TSM's always been at the top of the LCS, and I'm sure Reginald Field's like, well, I see a 5 next to our name in the standings, so something has to change.
Right. And, tournament play is where TSM has always, kind of gone in their full form. We've seen pretty much in every split major games where you just kind of end up scratching your head because they lost to a team they should have never lost to. And this, I think, having those games just inherently with them no matter what, and then adding in all of this drama only makes it so that you're going to end up in the kind of position that you are. And this, to me, like for the tournament, for the summer split, it doesn't really matter. I'm more concerned about Worlds and going into Worlds with this mentality and then just losing straight out. Not to say that we can expect too much better out of a North American team. I hate to say it, but it's true. But I'd hate to have it, I don't know, be as bad as I feel like it's going to be because of all this.
I don't think it'll be very bad this year. I think this year will be one of the more successful years for NA and especially Europe. This year, I feel like the Western teams are finally starting to catch up to the Asian teams, to the Chinese, to the Korean.
Yeah, I've got money on Fnatic for sure for that exact reason. Watching them go on such a winning streak, it's like almost watching an Asian team be in Europe. It's kind of what it seems like to me. It's like, oh my gosh, they're just winning such a ridiculous amount all the time. But I'm not so sure about NA.
I don't know. Like I said, I think this will be our best performance at a Worlds tournament so far.
Is it selfish for me to claim Europe, even though I'm predominantly a North American fan? Is it selfish of me to claim Europe kind of as my own going into this Worlds? Because I feel like if Fnatic goes in there and goes on a tear, even though it's not necessarily the region that I love the most, it still feels like a win for me.
It is definitely a win. This is it's a normal thing, really, when you see it's the separation that we have when NA and Europe play any Asian team. You're always kind of rooting for the European and North American teams just because those are the regions that you watch the most, those are the regions that you know the most about, so those are the regions that you somewhat tend to favor. I think that's fine. I feel the same way. When I watch any video gaming thing anywhere, if I see a North American or like a very Western European team play, I'll normally cheer for them in anything that happens. It's just the way that we are.
That's most of what it comes down to for me, because I just kind of like I gotta like this specific team, and I just love Fnatic so much. I just think they're so fun to watch that I honestly think they're probably more fun to watch than most of the North American games. At least this split, because this split's been kind of mediocre for North America, just like kind of how last split it was kind of mediocre for Europe. Everyone was kind of like, what's happening? So
to meta it a little bit, I actually think, I mean, not necessarily performance-wise in the sense of, like, globally performance, but I think this North American split is much more interesting than all the previous, because in the previous, you pretty much said, well, what's going to happen when Cloud9 and TSM meet in the finals?
Yeah, that's true, though.
Now, as we'll get into later, and I will push it right ahead into Europe in just a moment here, that's not really the question anymore, which is cool. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, let's hit up Europe. So I want to start this week with the standings as they currently are, and look at each team just kind of down the line, and then we'll look into the matchups that really matter for next week. So obviously you still have Fnatic at number 1, 16-0, unquestionably going to probably win it all for Europe. I think it would be a major upset no matter which way you shake it if they even lose a game. Maybe in one of the best of 3s or best of 5s they lose a game, but I could very easily see this team going all the way undefeated.
Yeah, that's I totally agree with it. This is the most dominant Western team we've ever seen, and I hope they have nothing but success come into playoffs and come into Worlds, because this team has shown that they can come back from deficits, they can exploit weaknesses in teams' play, and they know how to react to the game like on a game-by-game basis. Basically, they're the best Western team that we've ever had, and they're our hope at this point.
If we had the esports encyclopedia that is Optimus Tom with us tonight, I would ask the question of, is this the best winning record and probably overall the best performance for a new roster?
I think it's the best performance in general. The biggest winning streak in history, I believe.
Yeah, it's the only
for
other
all
team.
Regions, though?
Yeah,
yes.
For the only other team to have a longer winning streak than the Fnatic does right now is SK Telecom in Season 4 when they went undefeated in Champions Winter. That's the only time a team has had a longer winning streak than Fnatic does right now. And within that, I'm pretty sure they lost 1 or 2 maps, but they never lost a series in that season. Fnatic has not dropped a single map at this point. So it is by far the longest winning streak we've had in a long time, and it is for sure the best we've ever had in an LCS. I think Cloud9 had 13 or 14 in a row. So Fnatic's well over that point, and it looks like they're going to get closer to that 18-0 by the end of next week.
Ironically, I think the best thing that could happen for Fnatic right now is a loss. I think the team needs to really get some good experience playing while they're significantly down and in a potential...
Well, the thing is that they have been, though. Like, the last few games that they've won, they've been down, I think, 5K, 7K at a time, and then just win off of a team fight. They've been pulling the SK Telecom up where it's just like, yeah, you might be ahead, but we're still better at grouping than you and winning the game. So that's where I'm really actually stoked on them at the moment, is they've been playing some of their games from a pretty large deficit and still just making the better decision in the long run and winning the game, which I think is pretty, for lack of a better term, Asian level. Because that's what the Asians do.
Well, let's travel down to Spain, where we visit Origin, currently sitting in second place at 11-5. I mean, it's a pretty interesting story for them to come right out of the challenger scene and do as well as they have. I feel like the hype that came around this team has kind of dampened their success at this point. I think a lot of teams expected them to be so ridiculous that they would be number 1, and the fact that they've lost 5 games has kind of made people think like, oh, well, they're not that great. You know, they've lost 5 games. They're still number 2.
I don't know. I disagree with that personally. I know you guys, especially on this podcast, did not think Origin would do that well at the end of this split.
I was not one of them.
I was not one of them. I would say that the naysayers...
I said that they were
you were thinking top 4.
Origin
I remember
2.
specifically
the
saying that H2K was a worse team than Origin, and everybody immediately tried to kill me. And I think I knew that they were going to be a good team. I knew that they were not going to be the best team in Europe, obviously, with such talent like Fnatic in this league and some of the randomness that is Europe. Sometimes there will be minor slip-ups here and there. Origin with this new roster has shown that they can fall at times, especially this week against One Gambit. So they're not invincible. They're not as perfect as people thought they were coming out of the Challenger League. And of course, you have to take this with a grain of salt. It is the Challenger League. The caliber of teams in that league are not up to most LCS teams' standards. So I feel like they're doing perfectly for being a brand new organization, a brand new team coming into the LCS after winning the Challenger Series. I think this is right where they should be.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I would have been very surprised if they didn't finish in the top 3.
I always like to think if you took Fnatic out of the picture and looked at Europe, how would the teams kind of fall in line? And obviously, we're so deep into it at this point that we kind of know how that would work. But much earlier on, I think it gives you a totally different picture of exactly how Origin performs. Only losing to 3 other teams, I mean, it's just a much better performance overall when you consider it that way.
Especially since at the beginning of this split, we thought that Gambit was going to be a much better team, and we thought that SK was going to be much better of a team. Since those teams were slumping so much at the beginning of the split, that definitely changed how people thought about Origin as a team and how they could compete. Not saying that SK and Gambit are bad teams now. They're much better than they were at the beginning of this split, but I still feel like Origin was put under those 2 teams when they came in because everybody thought, oh, it's a challenger team. How good could they do against LCS teams? So I think they've melded back into the LCS with their veterans and amazing Soaz and Expeke. I think they've done a great job of coming back in, being a top-level team, and showing that they can still play with the top-level teams in Europe.
And it's actually Origin against the next team down, H2K, currently sitting at 10-6, that really take our first interesting matchup in Europe for next week. The 2 teams play each other, and all Origin needs to do is beat H2K in order to secure their bye week in the tournament. I kind of expect them to be the final matchup anyway, but it will be interesting to see that game. If Origin does manage to lose to H2K, H2K needs to continue to beat that second game against Gambit that week in order to move on to that second place position. So it's a big hill for them to climb. And as I recall, Origin beat H2K in their previous matchup, so they. H2K does need to win both in order to take that spot. Yeah,
H2K needs to win this game. They lost to Origin in their first game of the series. Everybody thought I was crazy when I said that. I stand by it. I knew that Origin was going to win. And also, this is an H2K that lost to Copenhagen Wolves and barely beat out Giants this week. H2K has slowly been dropping in the level of play that we've been seeing from them from last split and from the beginning of this split. So it is a very important game for them to secure that second place spot. They do play Gambit as well this week coming up. So as Gambit showed last week, they can beat top tier teams. They beat Origin. And I think H2K really needs to prepare. They need to make sure that they're ready for not just Origin, but Gambit as well, because that game will not be easy for them. And I expect Gambit, especially in the position that they're in, transition, to be fighting for every win that they can get.
I actually want to, before we get into sort of the middle tier, because that's really where the bulk of the conversation I think is going to happen, I actually want to work our way up. Copenhagen Wolves, sorry guys, you're probably stuck right where you are. If they can get 2 wins this week, which I just supremely doubt, and SK loses 2 games, then they have a chance to tie, but I'm pretty sure SK has that matchup on them anyway. So Copenhagen Wolves are pretty much looking at an auto-relegation spot.
Yeah, Wolves are eliminated. SK's got 2-0 on them, so
yeah,
they're
I'm
already
pretty sure, not to transition over there, but I'm pretty sure it's like Wolves, and isn't it TDK that are at the almost auto-relegated at this point?
They are. Yeah, both of them are auto-relegated.
Okay. Just, sorry, I didn't mean to want to transfer to North America, but teams that are auto-relegated.
We're stopping Europe.
North America
that's it.
That's it for Europe?
Europe. We talked about
it. Yeah, Optimus Tom's out here. Fuck it, let's just do it. No,
right?
I'm kidding. So Elements and SK, 2 very interesting teams. They actually do have, if I'm not mistaken, a game later on. but that probably isn't going to matter because SK needs to beat Fnatic, and Elements needs to lose to Gambit for the tie to actually come into place. So unless SK goes God mode, which with all the drama that they've been having recently, I doubt, and they beat Fnatic, nothing's really going to happen there. So
and also I think SK does have a chance to get out of the relegation tournament, I believe, because I think they beat Elements in their last their game against each other previously. So if they win this game,
it won't be. It wouldn't happen. They would need to beat if they beat Fnatic and Elements, that would improve them to 7-11. And if Rawcat lost all of their games, and
it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely. Yeah,
I mean,
very unlikely.
I think it's Fnatic. Like if it was any other team, I'd say maybe because
they
haven't.
It's Fnatic, yes.
Yeah, it's Fnatic. Sorry, SK Gaming, you're going to go to the relegation tournament, and I mean we'll see how that plays out. I just don't.
I don't think they'll lose. I don't think they'll get relegated, but I think they're kind of in the shape Dignitas's in last split.
Well, we've heard a lot of rumors, and I don't think we've covered it that well on the show, but we've heard a lot of rumors about the potential liquidness, I guess, not to make a pun on the team at all, but the roster overall isn't really secure right now. Rumors of rumors. So we'll see how that plays out for them. Doesn't look good, just in general. But that's kind of where we hit sort of the more interesting parts of Europe for next week. So, I mean, I'm going to rope Unicorns of Love into this, even though they do have one game up on the rest of the pack. But Unicorns of Love, Giant, Gambit, and Rawcat all are playing for their spots in the playoffs. One team at the end of this will get the shitty 7th place position that doesn't get to go to playoffs but doesn't get relegated. And the rest will make playoffs. So Unicorns of Love currently sit at 8-8, which gives them the advantage. They actually play Fnatic, so that's kind of. I mean, I think we can just take that as a loss at this point.
It's safe to assume, but anything can happen.
Yeah, I mean it's a Unicorns of Love without Kikis. We kind of have to put like the little divot, which makes it even harder for them. But who knows? It could happen.
But the more important game for them is against Giants on day one.
They've got to win that to be able to.
If they win that, they are in the playoffs.
Yes.
Because Giants would then move to 7-10. Unicorns would be 9-12. They'd get that position over Giants guaranteed, so they would be in the playoffs. If they win that game, they're in. If Giants lose, it's very hard for them to come back.
Yeah,
because it depends on what everybody else does, basically.
Right, and their best bet. I mean, it's tough because each team has kind of an easy game and then a really hard game. So Gambit has Elements, which they beat before, and they also have HGK, which they lost their matchup. So that the HGK is going to be the difficult one. Rawcat has Copenhagen Wolves. They should be a walk. Interestingly enough, they have Origin, and they've beaten Origin before.
Yeah, so that's also where it comes in to the mind game kind of thing. If it depends on what Rawcat shows up this week. If Tom puts Rawcat on his fantasy team this week, he's dooming them, and they won't make it.
Which I don't know how he would feel about that. Maybe he wants to give them faith. Maybe he wants to condemn them. Who knows?
It's the casting curse, or it's the faith curse. As soon as you put any faith or all your marbles into one team, they will immediately crush your soul.
Yep. Hail TSM.
Boo.
And then Giants, of course, as we mentioned, have Unicorns of Love, and we have Copenhagen Wolves. So this could end up being potentially in a couple of different. Well, I guess we wouldn't really see any tiebreakers, would we?
We could, I think. I think if Giants and Gambit tie, then they would need a tiebreaker. I believe that's the only 1-1. if it were to end up like that, I'm not sure. There's so many possibilities for this to come out.
Yeah, I was bad at my research this week. I did it
They're,
for everybody else but them.
They, I'm pretty sure the way this will come out, it'll be a 10-minute segment before day one starts of the broadcast, where they'll explain how each team would have to perform in order to get in. It's a very
on Wednesday.
PTL will for sure break it down and let everybody know what their situation is. It's very complicated. There are quite a few number of scenarios that can play out depending on what happens. So for sure, tune into PTL and figure out if you're looking for 100% accurate numbers on that.
So let's actually take a little bit of a poll here before we kind of, I guess, move on, because that's really the whole situation in Europe. Make the call, Kyle. Who do you think is going to be the team not to make it into playoffs?
The team not to make it into the playoffs from Europe will be Gambit Gaming.
All right, why is that?
They play H2K and they play Elements. Elements, of course, is fighting for that first relegation spot, I guess, the highest relegation spot they can get. And they also play H2K, so I feel like Gambit has the harder week of those games at the bottom. And they also have the most 1-1s with all of the teams with them. In fact, I think they have an 0-2 to Rocket, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that. But I think Gambit won't make it.
What's your call, Chris?
I think it's between Gambit and
one.
Elements.
I don't want to
I would actually have
Elements
to say
already out.
Elements.
Elements is already out.
Yeah,
Oh, is it?
Elements is
Okay,
out.
for sure. Then yeah, I think it's going to be Gambit. Just because they've shown the most inconsistent play. They really just aren't sure. I don't know. They're either really, really on and just dominate with Betsy, or just really off. And I think they're going to crack under the pressure, especially against H2K. And the next week, I don't think they're going to win that game. So I don't think Gambit will make it, which hurts me to say, because I've loved Gambit since they were Moscow 5, but they're no longer that anymore. So I just kind of have to be like, well, Diamond Prox, I wish you were on a better team.
From my perspective here, just to add a little bit to my Gambit pick, they have the hardest week of any of these middle of the pack teams. Mm-hmm. They play H2K and they play Elements, which are two very middle of the pack teams. H2K, of course, being a little bit higher. But Element has been on an upward trend lately.
Yeah.
H2K needs this win, of course, to get that bye into the second place, so they'll be very hungry for it. Most of the other teams have an easier game. Example, Rocket and Giants both have Copenhagen Wolves.
Yeah.
So that's why I picked them, basically, because they have the harder games, and I don't see Copenhagen Wolves upsetting anybody else.
I agree. That's definitely the issue I'm looking at, where it's just like that. I feel so bad for Gambit in this scenario, though, that they just happen to be this close and play against H2K, and Giants and Rocket both have the fortunate of playing the bottom tier team. But how it would be pretty hilarious if somehow Copenhagen Wolves takes the game off of them, because that would just be right back into the upsets. So
that throws everything for a loop.
It completely throws everything for a loop, because we're assuming that Copenhagen Wolves are going to lose both these games, which is a pretty solid assumption with a 3-13 win-loss ratio. But
I'm actually going to go against the grain here. I don't disagree with the points you guys are making about Gambit, but I think that Rocket is going to just throw hard and lose against Origin. But
only Tom was here.
win against Copenhagen Wolves. I think Giants and Gambit are going to go 2-0, and it's going to bring the whole bar up to the point where they needed that one extra win to stay competitive. So
really, so you think Gambit's going to beat H2K?
Only because I have to. But yes, H2K, and I'd say I have to because we can't all agree. That's boring. H2K has been a team always known to crack under pressure. And I just think this is a pressure situation. They're going to be freaking out over Origin, their matchup there. They have to win that game to even have a chance of getting the bye week. And I think they're going to flop. I think they're going to take Gambit for granted, and Gambit's going to walk over them. Or it'll be close.
You know what? I do think that's actually a very good point.
We've seen it. We've seen it happen so many times before.
H2K has been a team in the past to crack under the pressure. The promotion tournament is one example. I think 2 other times they've tried to get into the Challenger Series is another example. Last year's playoffs is another example of this. So I think that's actually a really good assumption, Tom. I'm proud of you on that one.
Thank you. I'm not an analytical person, but I have my moments. Speaking of having my moments, I'd like to move over to the North American region at this time, where we've got kind of interesting, not as cutthroat as Europe.
But this was a great week for North American LCS. Yeah. They were just great, actually great games. Because normally I just kind of I watch it and I love watching the LCS, but this split in particular for me, there hasn't been any like, oh, I wonder who's gonna win, or oh, nail biters or upsets. And this week was just week of upsets for me. I think there's only a couple games that I figured were like, this is a relatively slow game, especially just Cloud9. Just did super well, I feel, this week.
Yeah, we'll kind of...
Where you want to start, so we'll go ahead, because this was actually a week that I was really excited to be like, ooh, LCS was good this week.
We'll have some moments at the end where we can kind of dish about the games, because there was some awesome games this week, and there was some really positive movements out of a lot of teams, and we'll definitely want to cover those. But I actually want to start from the bottom up with North America, because it gets more and more interesting as we progress higher and higher.
Sounds perfectly fine to me.
Fans of the show, longtime listeners, will understand this statement perfectly, and we don't need to discuss it any further than this. TDK is TDK. Moving on to Enemy. Enemy has kind of screwed themselves pretty hard. There's been a lot of really inconsistent play from them throughout the split. They currently sit at 4-12 in that 9th place spot. They're going up. They have to get games over a very hot Cloud9, and I say very hot. Please note that is a super relative term. It is not a regular hot Cloud9. It's
a hot for this split Cloud9.
Yeah, it's dense fog.
It still was pretty impressive play. Like it was not Season 3 Cloud9 of we're looking at what Fnatic looks like now, but it definitely was night and day in comparison to what they've been over this split. That's for sure.
And we can talk about the game, especially I think against CLG in a little bit, but we'll cover that in just a moment. Enemy has a pretty rough week this week to do any kind of movement. They have to go up against TSM and they have to go up against Dignitas. Knowing those two teams and where they're at right now, I'm not going to say it's an impossible feat, but it's incredibly unlikely given the fact that Cloud9's doing better, and they have to go up against TDK, which should be a wash, and they have to go up against TSM, which they already have the game up on TSM. I'd say if there's anybody who could pretty reasonably beat TSM at any time, it would be Cloud9. They took the first game, they might take the last game. And that'll be enough to bump Cloud9, either to reserve their pick of the best.
They have that already, I believe.
Do they?
I think so, because let's put it this way: if Enemy lose one game, then they get the spot no matter what, because they have the 2-0 over Enemy.
It would be 1-0. Yeah, no, you're right. 2-0. I'm sorry. Yeah. Enemy would have to lose one. Would have to win both of theirs, and Cloud9 would have to lose both of theirs for that to happen. And I don't foresee that happening,
because Cloud9 plays TDK, and as we explained before, TDK is TDK.
Moving our way up the list, though, and I guess kind of to add a little bit of drama to the Cloud9 situation as well. Teammate has a stupid hard week, insurmountable. They have CLG, who's doing better, and they have Liquid, who's doing great. So if they lose both of their games and Cloud9 wins both of their games, there's something going on there. And I think actually, who won in a tie situation?
I think it's a 1-1 between those two.
I think that could be a tiebreaker. That would be the most
Teammate won the first game. Cloud9 just won their recent game against them. I think it's a 1-1.
I'm looking now.
I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I think that will be a thing. I think Team 8 will probably lose both their games this week, and it really is just going to depend on the Cloud9 versus TSM game because,
Okay, so
TDK.
Cloud9 beat Team 8 in week 3. And then not being prepared.
Team A beat Cloud9 in week 6.
The 1-1, so that'll be a pretty good showdown actually. And I think it will be the kind of situation where if it does come down to that, Cloud9 will just wash them, because I feel like the veteran status of a playoff scenario, even though this isn't them in playoffs, but a playoff scenario, Cloud9 will click, and High will be there and be present. Incarnation showed great play this week, so if he can
He sure
continue
did.
that-
He got me I think fucking 60 sanity points this week, versus he's normally been like in the 25s in my other league that I don't have. And I was like, yes,
Yeah.
I was literally dancing the first game I was watching. I was like, who's 9-0? Oh yes, give me those fantasy points. And then second game was just as good. It's like, ooh.
Yeah. So So the only really point of contention there is who ends up going to relegation. Is it going to be Team 8 or is it going to be Cloud9? Either way, it's going to be a very difficult matchup for those teams because Renegades and Coast have been doing very good in the Challenger Series, and I think both of those teams have potential to find their way back into the LCS.
One of those two would be auto-qualified.
Right. But what I'm saying is that it's going to be a hard matchup if no matter who has to play a team to fight their way in.
I think we've all agreed that it's enemy who will be playing whoever loses of that. So.
Oh, that's potentially true. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I'm sorry to ruin your thing there, but
No, yeah, I was going with the thing there, but I was wrong. I will fully admit when I'm wrong, and sometimes I'm wrong.
sorry to kill your bit there, but
Yeah, no, Dignitas. Speaking of killing bits, Dignitas has an interesting week this week. We're just kind of working our way up until we hit the clusterfuck that is 1 and 2 right now. Dignitas has an interesting week because they have kind of a medium difficulty level week. They've got CLG, which should be pretty hard, but they also have NME, which could really go either way. Depending on how TSM decides to show up, they could potentially inch their way up a little bit higher in the standings. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. Enemy does play TSM, so I think we all can agree that we don't think TSM will lose to Enemy. And if that happens, then
it'll be close.
It'll be.
I don't know if it'll be close.
Actually, you know what? I have to stand corrected. Both of them play Enemy.
Yeah, they do.
So Dignitas plays CLG in their first game. TSM, as we discussed, plays Cloud9. So again, it's not going to be easy. I'm thinking at the very least both of them go 1-1 though. So it should be
either
TSM.
Either way, neither team is playing for a playoff spot. It's just who's in the last playoff spot and who's in the next best from that. So I think it won't matter too much for TSM because I think they're going to excel in the finals scenario. But for Dignitas, it could be the difference of how long they stay in.
I am going to go out on a limb and say TSM is going to pull CLG in the playoffs this year. That's what I'm going to go ahead and say. Yeah, just because I don't think any of their champion... I don't think the most current meta, like as of 5.13, is reflecting their playstyle very well. It seems... because Bjergsen's never done super well on mages, respectively. Ezreal's kind of been his thing lately. He's always been very, very good at the assassin role. But mage role isn't his best. It's not that he's bad on it, but like you see Incarnation with the new mage changes as of now, he just took off, especially with the help from High. And I don't feel that Santorin and Bjergsen have enough of a good mage/tank jungler synergy for them to do well, and I think that's going to break them apart at the core, and they're going to fall apart for playoffs. Or Reggie could give them a shot of adrenaline in the ass, and they somehow pull it out and turn it out, and then they dominate. It's kind of going to go either or. I don't feel like they're going to do okay in playoffs. I think they're either going to completely tank it and CLG it, or they're going to just do really well in playoffs.
I think
I'm
if there's going to be any difference in TSM's performance, I'm definitely going to say that it's going to be in the AD carry role. And if
definitely.
if they just at the very least don't have to think about Wild Turtle. Like if Wild Turtle can show up and be there and just do positive, like not necessarily get a bunch of kills, but just not die a ton or put them in compromising situations, I think you can allow Dyrus to be Dyrus at this point because he's actually doing particularly well, and protect a Bjergsen strategy. Have Wild Turtle pick Sivir.
Because but who are you going to protect? Who's Bjergsen going to play that you're going to protect? Because none of his champion pool right now is really in favor, and it's like Zed's out. Is Ari
Azir, I guess?
Azir kinda, and he doesn't play Azir very well. He's okay at it. He's not bad at it, but he's not great at it. But the thing is, I'm gonna have to agree with you with Turtle. Is going to be their emphasis, because if he's doing things, I'm forgetting, who did TSM play in their first game this week?
Impulse they played.
Impulse they lost a lot because Turtle flashed in, W'd in as Tristana they still exhausted. Like Turtle just was doing stupid things in that game.
And even in their game against Dignitas, when they got first blood, it was a pretty solid team fight. And then for no fucking reason,
Turtle just walked away.
Bailed.
He's just like, all right, well, we're just gonna walk over this way, and they could have definitely got like a triple out of that. I mean, they still won the game, but it was just Turtle's head was just kind of like, where the fuck is Turtle going? Like, what is he doing? What is okay? Versus, if we have the really good Turtle that shows up and gets pentakills, then I think they're gonna do okay. But there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts with TSM. Versus I think these other teams are a little bit more steady at the moment.
Yeah.
Also, can I just say that Dignitas has the chance to play major spoilers this week in the fact that they play CLG.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of just taking that one more chomp up to the standings to where we get to the second place debacle. We currently have Liquid, CLG, and Tip all vying for second place at 11 and 5. With realistically, Gravity not that far away. Considering who Gravity has to play this week in Tip, there's still a chance that they may not come in first place. They're only at 12 and 4.
Yeah, this week is huge for these top 3 or 4 teams, I should say. CLG, Tip, and Liquid all sit at 11 wins, 5 losses. All of them, except for Liquid Impulse, is at a 1-1. So their matchups this week are extremely important. CLG,
a really interesting scenario where if Tip, Gravity, and CLG all tie, which I think is possible, I think they all have matchups against each other. So
I think Gravity beat CLG both, though.
Did they now?
I think so. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure Gravity has a 2-0 against CLG.
Yeah, I don't know how that works with multiple teams tying against each other and which...
Because this is what would happen as well. If Impulse beat Gravity, but Liquid beat Impulse, Liquid would have to play a tiebreaker against Impulse, but would automatically get put lower than Gravity because they have a 2-0 against Liquid. So it's a very complicated tiebreaker scenario if that happens. The games this week that Impulse plays are extremely important. They play Gravity in their first game, which they lost their first matchup against, I believe. Mm-hmm. So it's a 1-0 for Gravity right now. If Impulse wins that, they tie with Gravity at 12 and 5 in both wins and losses. They have a 1-1 tie. If CLG beat Team 8, and this is the game that I really think people need to watch, Dignitas versus CLG. If CLG lose that game against Dignitas, that puts them in a 1-1 tie with Impulse, but again, I think it's a 2-0 with Gravity, so I don't think that matters. Then, if Impulse go and lose against Liquid, then Liquid and Impulse would be tied, but Gravity would be ahead of them, and it's just so
It's a cluster.
complicated.
I mean,
Yeah, that's a very large cluster.
if you,
Okay, let's just go through team by team.
yeah, if
Let's
you
do
look
that.
at TIP, I mean, they have the hardest week of all. They have Gravity and Liquid, and they also have a questionable roster spot in Adrian. There is the hope that he'll play for this week, but I think even if he does, I mean, that's best case scenario, obviously, but
It's
clearly his
still-
heart's not going to be in it.
All I think about whenever I see Tip play is how good these guys would have been in Season 2 and Season 3.
Yeah.
Is their play style with Rush, like if Rush was just on a good Lee Sin champion, when Lee Sin was good, I mean, at least had patch, I guess. But I don't know. They're so consistently inconsistent. Is for me with Tip. They go on this very strange tilt where if they can't be aggressive, they just don't win the game. If they can be really aggressive and bully people out of lane, they seem to win the game. But going against CLG, I don't know if they'll be able to do that. I really don't.
Well, they always do get their confidence at the end of the split. I mean, last split they went on just an absolute tear and almost made it all the way to the end, but ended up kind of losing some in the last few games. But I think they've got a pretty serious chance at upsetting Gravity. It'll be very interesting to see how the mostly green Gravity roster takes to the amount of pressure that they have on them right now. I mean, they're potentially, looking at the number 1 seed going into this tournament, and with the other teams being as it is, they also have to start considering the potential of Worlds. That's a lot of pressure to put on teams who don't have a lot of experience.
So this is how I want to look at this. Team by team, we go through Impulse. They play Gravity and Liquid. I think they get put down out of anybody into the 4th place scenario after all this is said and done. CLG plays Dignitas and Team 8. I feel that they will at least go 1-1, if not 2-0, which then goes to Liquid. Liquid plays Team 8 as well, and they play Impulse. I feel Liquid will win this game against Impulse, which will force Impulse down and will force Liquid into a tiebreaker with CLG. I don't think that Gravity will lose to Impulse, and I especially don't think they will lose to TDK. So if Gravity win one game, they're basically guaranteed first place and the bye.
Mm-hmm.
So the matchup that will decide everything is the very last game of the split, the regular split that is, Liquid Impulse. And I feel that this game is the only game to watch this week. It is the most important. And I think it will 100% decide who gets the bye or not, but I also think it decides which team goes to the finals in this split. I think whoever wins this matchup will be the team that goes to the finals at the end to play another team. I'm not sure. I have a feeling it's going to be Gravity.
Oh man, that's gonna. I'm putting my money still on CLGs versus Liquid. I don't know how possible it is, but that's still just that's my money. It's going right there.
I think I don't know if CLG is going to be able to put it together.
It's a lot of hope in there, Tom, with my money. So shut the fuck up and let me have my moment.
I'll give it to you that CLG has the greatest potential this week because they only play Dignitas and Teammate. Like those are 2 games that CLG should win.
Should is the asterisk point in that sentence.
Well,
they should win.
The thing about
Whenever
CLG
this happens, CLG.
They
well, the thing is, though,
but they broke.
No. Yeah, that's exactly it. See, they broke their slump because usually at about midway through the split, they start losing. They lose a lot.
Always.
They continue to lose, and then literally, then it's just like, okay, well, we're in playoffs and we're gonna just lose. Versus now, they actually kind of got back from their slump and are on a winning streak again. So I mean, it seems that spirits are good and everyone's kind of like smiling a bit in CLG, which is usually not the case at this point. So I think that they might be able to pull it off, but that's a lot of hope.
Afromu might not announce his retirement again this split.
Oh yeah, they were quote unquote retirement. How long was High in retirement for? Oh yeah.
Well, no, at the end of every split.
I know.
Yeah.
You know, still, I gotta TSM jab you though. And my favorite was Reggie talking about retiring right at the end of season 3 because of the whole Azubu Frost versus them. They're like, yo, they cheated, and if they're allowed to cheat, well, I'm just gonna retire.
Trust me, no one will jab TSM more than I will. I mean, fans are usually the most critical of the team. Like, the stuff that TSM does wrong is always the dumbest shit, and it's just so frustrating because you know they're all better than that. God, it's the worst. But let's take predictions for this week. Since it's a little difficult with the way that this is to necessarily quantify what you think the positioning is going to be, I'm just looking for the 2 bye-week teams. So we'll start again with Kyle, number 1.
Bye-week teams we're going with?
Yeah, so number 1 and number 2.
Gravity Liquid.
My turn. I do think CLG Liquid can pull it out, but I'm gonna have to agree with Kyle. I do think that the 2 strongest looking teams at the moment are Gravity and Liquid. I want to say the CLG, but just from watching team play, I think those are the 2 most comfortable teams together that play together.
I'm gonna name this episode the Everybody Agrees episode.
Yeah,
everybody
it's
everybody gets along.
I mean, well, really, how could you not? Especially on that. Was it the Liquid Baron steal this week when Corky just blindly steals Baron?
Okay, that's I gotta stress that there's a huge element of luck. There's nothing.
Oh, I know there's a ton of luck, but I'm just saying.
I was about to say.
No. That's not a skill thing. But after that, how could you not be on the highest horse possible?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, how could you just not be just so stoked on life and just be like, holy shit, dude, we have an 80 carry that blindly just randomly rocketed in and got Baron. You know, it's totally
I could have made that play. I could have made
you couldn't.
I don't know if you saw it. He did time it. They do about 1,000 DPS per second, and he waited the amount of seconds he thought. He waited until he had the rocket. No, he didn't. But he guessed it. He timed it. You can see when he actually stops. Because if you go back, I watch the replay a lot, and he goes back, he stops, he waits about 4 seconds, and he did a very good. I hate this word, but this is one of the few times that I'm going to say is guesstimation.
If that's true,
estimated,
if it actually played out to that amount of time that he waited.
Because
the way I saw it, the way when I watched it, I saw him just approach and then rocket in, and then I thought that's just what he did.
He had the big rocket timed out, and he waited over at Red Buff for 4 seconds, staying out of vision because he knew it was awarded. So he waited 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, and then went for it. So I mean, still completely random and lucky, but there was an element of he had a pretty good idea about when it would be finishing. But still, it was just like one of those oh my god moments. But still, I mean, after something like that, the morale boost, and listening to their telecoms, like, none of them thought that was going to happen. Like, that's just one of those, oh, dude. So, versus, you know, it's just as demoralizing to TSM. So, I just, after that, have to say that Liquid's probably going to be near the top of this split.
I mean, I'm inclined to agree. I think Liquid as a team has gone through such a journey this split that it's kind of like, it's just their game to lose, but looking at CLG's week, I can't count them out yet. I mean, Dignitas have had some really good games where they've been able to pull off wins, but they've got a lot of things fighting against them. CLG has the motivation and drive to push forward. Dignitas really isn't playing for anything. So it'll be what it is. I'm gonna just agree with you guys and say that it's also going to be it's going to be Liquid.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious though.
Which from a storyline perspective, which I always love, that's the best case scenario, for sure. Because it's like the
they're just very strong. I got to give credit to their management because last split.
Well, that's for Gravity. I mean, Gravity in and of itself is an amazing story.
Still, just Liquid and Gravity. Their management of getting their team on the same page was pretty impressive, especially with the language barrier of Piglet. getting him adapted because Piglet last split sucked. Like just
Yeah.
straight up. Piglet was one of my favorite AD carries in season 3. I watched them, right as they were getting before SKT was really even SKT. And I was like, dude, this guy's so good. And then to see him come over here, I was like, this is gonna be so good. And he just the communication breakdown was really hard on them. And I was like, they're not gonna recover. They're gonna pull Edward, pull someone over. They're gonna think he's gonna be really good. He's gonna suck, and they're gonna send him right back. And they somehow were able to pull together the split. So I just got to give management credit for that because that's hard.
Yeah,
That's really hard to do.
I mean, it's an awesome story that they have. Gravity, of course, coming from the Challenger Series and then making their way to where they are today. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
So that'll be. I mean, those are the games to watch. Really, keep your eye on the top of the standings as those kind of shift around. It is to me a little bittersweet that we're not talking about Cloud9 and TSM. I always love the story.
Dude, I'm so tired of that.
Yeah, but I always think that it just becomes more and more interesting because just when you think TSM's finally got their club over Cloud9 and they pull off that win, Cloud9 comes ahead, they win their game, then they suck. Now they're getting better. It just could. There's so
at least this week we have a Cloud9 versus TSM game.
Yeah.
So at least we'll get to see because especially after Incarnation seems to be adapting pretty well, and it seems to me at least that it's High's encouragement is the reason he's there. Because High was a great mid player, and just this week specifically, High did nothing but just babysit mid lane, and Incarnation took off with it though.
Well,
they
that
really
first,
utilized it.
What was the game they won there? Their matchup against Enemy when they dove on Inox, who, I mean, boo on Inox for playing Master Yi.
Yeah.
But the Ahri and who is their fucking jungler? Oh, the Ahri Shyvana dive that they took together was just so well played. And it was a confident dive that put them in, got them the first blood. They lost High in the process, but at the end of the day, that wasn't that big of a deal. And they got Incarnation out with enough so that Enemy's response action up in the top lane allowed Incarnation to roam up. And it was really like just bad moves on Enemy's part to not realize that Incarnation was healthy enough to go up after him. And they stayed just that little bit too long. Otter got low. Flares he tanked this game. I mean, if you've been paying attention to Enemy Esports since the Challenger days, you would know that all of their success came from when Otter and Inox got super hot. And in the games where they both did it together, it was just a complete wash. But at least in one of those games, one of those two players would just be absolutely dominant. And I think LCS teams had a really good read on that.
This shows the inexperience of Enemy. They're a young team. They're a young organization. It just shows that they have work to do. They need to make sure.
I think they'll make it through into the LCS again. I think that the experience that they've gotten and the lessons they've learned throughout the LCS is going to give them the edge over any challenger team. I think they've got good people behind their company, and they'll do fine. But this season was pretty disappointing for them, I'm sure.
It's just they don't really have the talent that some of the other teams do. Yes, they have Otter. Yes, they have Inox, but the rest of their team has shown to be of a lower class of player. Not that they're bad players by any means. Obviously, they're in the LCS. They won last year's Challenger Series, so...
Yeah. I mean, I'd keep your eye on Otter and Body Drop. I think if those two... It may not be on Enemy Esports that they go and do pretty awesome things, but they are sort of the new generation of players coming into the LCS, and as we see some of the old guard, as it were, Double Lift overall not having a super awesome performance season long. Wild Turtle starting to falter a little bit, sneaky, you could even say.
Well, a lot of this is, though, Mon, you have to look at is this is the complete anti-AD carry meta this season. It's just
Sure.
so let's just one-shot the AD carry, let's just shit all over their face and let our tanks carry. So kind of all the ADs are getting hit pretty hard with that, where it's just kind of everything sucks in their world.
In the same light, though, that does bring scrutiny upon the player, and if the player
course.
can't perform, movements are made, a la TSM. So
See, this is a problem, I think, though, especially with a young team like Enemy. I don't think the solution to them being a better team is to immediately change rosters.
right,
I feel
No,
like they need to
definitely
stick
not.
together as a team. They need to work on things as a team, get better synergy going, get a better support staff in, and they could be a team that doesn't get relegated next split if they continue in, which I think they will. And also, I think they could make playoffs next year if they improve on a level.
Yeah, because I mean, well, they got gimped super hard when they don't have their full roster until 3 weeks, 4 weeks left in the split. Like, not even that. It's just kind of well, this is a free win, and it wasn't even Coast kind of reasons where it was just Coast was genuinely just did not play very well. TDK's played well, but they clearly just have no idea what they're doing together. You can tell it's kind of just like, hey man, we just met in solo queue and we're just playing an LCS this week. It's
Well,
kind of what it looks like.
yeah. I mean, and they had a total flip flop from even going from the Challenger series into the LCS before they had their visa problems. They had a gigantic roster swap. So the TDK coming from Challenger to LCS was a totally different team. And then you break them up, and then you finally get them together. And they actually, they've won a game. I think given more time, the team would have improved pretty significantly. It's just, I feel bad for Seraph in all this. I mean, he goes to a different team, and then that team just gets unfortunately washed super hard.
Yep, that is true.
I think everybody saw this coming, though, as soon as they came in. They were definitely a tier below Enemy at the end of the Challenger Series last split. So I think people started to assume that this same kind of result they're getting now would happen in the LCS. I'm sure it wasn't to this extent, but I don't think this is a surprise to anyone that they're doing this bad. I do feel bad for Seraph, after coming off of that very weird year that he had, or split, I should say, with CLG. Was it a split or a year he had with CLG?
I think he had a year.
A full year with them. So, it was a weird experience for him, I'm sure, after being on a somewhat successful team, making playoffs, getting 3-0 by Liquid every
At least
time.
a team that people paid attention to.
Yeah, see, he wasn't the star, and he didn't have to be the star on CLG. And I think that on TDK, that's not the type of player that he is, and that's the type of player that they needed for him to be. So I don't blame this on Seraph. It's not in his playstyle, especially with the meta that it's been. It has not been a carry top kind of meta for the majority of this split, really. So I think TDK just came in at the wrong split. If they would have come in last split, maybe as a team, they might have had a little bit more success, but I just feel like the situation that this split turned into with the meta the way it was just didn't work out for them.
Yeah. But I think we've kind of taken North America as far as the train will take us, so to speak. So that will wrap it up. I don't have any fun segments or anything prepared for you guys this week. I started, and then I was like, yeah, you know what? We're going to have enough to talk about. And we
Yep.
did.
We did.
Can
We
only
got,
imagine if we had everybody on the show. This would be.
Oh, this would
been
be
a
a
long week.
very long show.
We'd
Yeah,
still,
this would've
we'd
been like
still
2
be in
hours.
Europe.
We would
Yeah,
still,
but it would be because Tom would just be ranting, and then you would have said Rockcat isn't going to make it. And he would have
and then
just flipped his
Sifa would have
shit.
yelled at him for
Yeah.
40 minutes. Oh man,
And
Yeah.
then
what a cluster it would have been.
That's the rundown.
as soon as we talk about Worlds, then Sifa gets all excited to talk about teams not from the LCS, and then we end up doing an hour on that. And, it all falls apart from there. But yeah, that's been it from everybody here at the Trinity Force Podcast Network.
Wait a minute, Mont.
I'm rolling out.
Wait a minute, we didn't talk about fantasy.
That's not important. Bye, guys.
See
It's
ya.
very important. Hey, it's very important because this guy's #1 in the league. Let's go, boys.
Yeah.
The guy who doesn't even play League of Legends, barely watches, is #1 in fantasy. You should be ashamed.
And on that bombshell.
And yet you're on the podcast. So if anybody would like to join the LCS Rundown crew, send us an email.
Because
LCS@TrinityForcePodcast.com.
I am not a person to be here. Hey, I didn't do too bad this episode, though.
No,
I feel like I did just as
especially because your
good.
teams are winning, Kyle.
It's only because my teams are winning.
Hey, you know what, Kyle? You showed up.
I did show up. I came all the way from a movie theater, and I drove as fast as I could, of course, within the speed limits and the laws of this great city in Ontario that I live in. I hustled and bustled my way to get over here, and then just to wait for half an hour for nobody else to show up.
Oh, yeah.
This dedication I put into this show, it's unreal,
We
ladies
love
and
you
gentlemen.
too, Kyle.
Yeah, so yeah, that's going to be it for the show this week. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you out there in podcast land, don't forget to check the Challenger update, which will actually be published this week a little bit later on. That's going to be a whole different segment now. It's not going to be tagged on to the end of this. Be sure to check out the other shows that are on the network. We're all out here. There's a ton of people involved in this lovely, lovely network, and they have a ton of shows. Mitch was not able to join us tonight because he is working on his super special Patreon project, which helps support the network, and it's a special show that only Patreon donors have access to, so please check that out at patreon.com/TForce Network.
Have they announced what this episode's going to be?
Yes, it's on Corky this week.
On Corky, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want to
they have
head on
the
over to
TDK
patreon.com.
Yep,
They do. They have Latman, I believe is his name.
He's going to be coming on the show and talking about that. So awesome content out of that. If you haven't heard it, there is a preview episode available. You can check out the subreddit, which is r/TForce Network, to find out more about that.
Just a disclaimer, though, that episode that they have as a freebie is much different from the show that it's turned into now.
Yeah,
Adam was on that episode, and it was a cluster. So it's much more professional. It's much better now without our wonderful, wonderful leader. He's not very good at talking about champions he doesn't play. So yeah, make sure you head on over to Patreon. Head on, see if you send us a little bit of a donation. Everything helps. It helps out everybody. As sure you heard in my new bumper that I'll be putting on the beginning of the show this week. I'm sure everybody will enjoy that, because apparently a backslash is a /, and I've been doing it wrong for the rest of my life. So yeah, there'll be a new bumper in the beginning of the show. So head on over to patreon.com r/TForce Network, at LCS Rundown on Twitter.
We actually have a new sponsor this week, too. Really cool product. It is soap made out of hemp and other things that are exciting and illegal in some areas.
Yep,
radsoap.com is our newest sponsor. That'll actually be the bumper that gets played. Nudge, nudge, a producer.
No, I'm putting both of them. It's both of them. I'm doing 3 sponsors at the beginning of this show. It's insane.
Ew. God, that's
No,
so
I'm not. I'm not
long.
doing 3. It's 45 seconds long. It'll have the rad soap, and it'll have patreon.com, of course.
Great.
But
And,
you won't even care because you will have already listened to it. So why are we still talking about it?
And that's 20% off. That's for the people. Yeah, Chris, we got stuff to plug here.
I know. I'm sorry.
gave them
I
lots
got
of
to
LCS.
interrupt your plugs with my
We gave them
Wookiee.
LCS. There's
Do you
still
want a
6
mic?
people hanging out on Twitch.
Chris, we got to get you a new mic. Do you want that mic or not?
Yeah, we
You've
gotta
been
earn that
asking
money.
for it. Been asking for it for a long time. Adam's got it. It's just sitting there.
Yep,
I'm
gotta
like,
earn
hey.
that. Gotta earn that podcast dough.
Yeah, who's
We
here?
gotta-
Who was here last week, Mott? Oh, me and Kyle.
Who
Yep.
ended up doing the show?
You
I
didn't.
did.
You didn't even get a hold of me. I
No,
was
you
here.
didn't.
I was ready. I
We're
was
talking
in a
about this
call.
after the show. We're talking about this after the show because that is a complete misconception.